Seeking the wise,
with Aaron and Alexander discussing the just philosophy,
covering self-development, emotional processing, conscious relationships, and 5 levels of overall wellness.
Welcome to the Wise podcast here in the virtual studio. Still with me is Alexander.
So good to be here with you again in another episode back to back.
Yes, the last one went way longer than we thought on that one story. So I have many more stories to share from the past couple weeks that Alexander and I haven't talked about. So we're doing these casual episodes and seeing if you guys dig them or not. But this episode is going to get into some of the destiny card and astrological energies, but then also signs. And when things keep happening to you in your life, is that a sign? What can you learn from it? So we're going to get into a bunch of instances of those as well. So I just wanted to front load all that. So if that's something that you guys are interested out there, stay tuned as we go through this. So first I'm going to bring up the 5 of Spades energy that I'm in. So Alexander, as we've talked about, I had that whole thing where there was a fire near me, and I had the question about whether there was some like hazardous materials in that and all that. We didn't talk about on the podcast, but that's just part of the backstory of the 5 of Spades. I had the 5 of Spades in my Mercury period of my new destiny card birth year that started April 18th. And then, as you pointed out, I also have it as a year-long in my other spread, in my planetary ruling spread. So I have, kind of double. I've moved through the 5 of Spades already in the Mercury, so I'm in my Venus period. That was around about 2 weeks ago. I moved through that. So thankfully, I know the energies can go all year long, and I'm getting that anyway, but I'm glad. I don't know, that Mercury period, I used to think it was good. Not judging, but like it brings in a lot of like quick energies that you have to be aware of. So one of the things with the 5 of Spades that, just reading and reflecting on is it talks about like there can be quick changes in health or like your mindset around your health or your job or your living situation, like all these things you can be focused more on changing. And most importantly, when dealing with it in it falling in the Mercury period, it talks about like how quick these things can be.
Mm-hmm.
So after reflecting on that, I just turned 40. And I think when you turn 40, you start feeling older. And even if it is a mindset, I started feeling a little bit older like a year and a half ago. My body's changing. I'm not feeling as young and spry anymore. And, I start questioning in my head for the longest time. I was like, is there just like some vitamin that I'm deficient in that I'm just not, I shouldn't be feeling like this. I was in denial that I was getting older. But I still keep thinking that there's just like one thing that's going to bring me back to feeling like that. But I started reflecting upon any sort of habits that maybe weren't in my best interest. Like one that I've had for really my whole life is going to bed late, getting up late when I can. I did used to actually go to work, so I did have a different schedule then. But now working from home and not really having to get up at really any certain time because I make my own schedule, things can get a little out of hand. But in reflecting upon these energies in my chart, when I took my most recent trip, I got to set what time I was going to leave, and it's a 13-hour drive. So if I leave at 6, I'm getting there at 6 or 7, in the PM if I'm leaving in the AM.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to be, realistic about what time I wanted to get there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get up at 5:30 and hopefully leave by 6:30. And, normally that would be an issue for me. I would be really tired and groggy, and a lot of times before leaving on a trip, I can't sleep that well because I'm anxious about driving that long. That's usually my thing with long trips is the driving. I do have like some anxiousness around doing that whole thing, not getting tired during it, doing it myself and not getting into an accident or something like that. All that, those fears and stuff like that come in. So it can cause like not getting a lot of sleep, and then almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah, yeah,
create the
exactly.
tiredness. It's so funny how that works. But anyway, I did that. I left around 6:37, and then I knew that the next morning, I mean, essentially I could sleep in, but then I was going up to visit work too, and so I would have to get up early. So I just kind of made a point, reflecting on that 5 of spades energy, that I was going to, you know, take this opportunity that was presenting itself to try to create a new schedule, get up early. And so that's what I did. And I felt amazing. Like I have so much energy now. I'm not falling asleep. Like before I would wake up around like 9 or 10, and I would start work and I wouldn't really be awake until like 2 to 3 p.m.
Mhm.
and actually feel alive like a human. I would just feel like groggy and just like out of my body. And then that would carry in, and about like 10, 11 o'clock at night, I would start to get tired, but then if I didn't go to bed, I would be awake till like 2 in the morning, and then that cycle just continues. So, now I feel great, and, like, it really I really have found that one thing I think I've been missing. I've been fighting against the natural cycle. So anyway, my question around this is, with this energy and specifically in the Mercury period where it says your health can take a sudden positive or negative direction, can we read that ahead of time and utilize that energy to make positive changes so that possibly that energy that's coming in, you're like using all that energy up so there is none to shift it to the negative suddenly, because
Mhm.
I feel like the positive is more in your own control and the negative isn't in your control. Because who's gonna read that and be like, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna eat Cheetos for the next 2 weeks." Like, who wants it? You know what I mean? Like, who wants to feel into that quote negative part of that? So, I guess my question is, in your experience and wisdom, is that a thing? Like, can we see that those are coming up and then try to burn off that energy with intentional direction?
Yes, and I did want to speak to all our listeners to remind that this is the Destiny card system that we discuss quite often, and this we run reports for people that breaks your yearly down into 52-day cycles, and that's what he's talking about as a Mercury period. That's 52 days, but then we also have cards that go through our whole year, and he also has what's called a 5 of spades in the yearly spread as well. So understand that fives are restless numbers, and spades is around work or health typically, and it can be involved with land as well. So when we see a five coming, that means that there's going to be change, and that change can be either seen and perceived as so-called good or so-called bad. We get to the free will of how we look at that. Now, it also means that it's very important that you work with that energy during that period, especially. So I like to suggest for anybody that looks ahead, and I suggest not to look too far ahead. Normally, only one. My suggestion is typically only one 52-day period ahead, but that you can actually prepare for that and be ready that when that time hits, that you're already in a pattern of doing that. Now, some people will wait until that period comes to start something new, but I like to suggest, hey, 3 weeks before that comes, go ahead and initiate the structure and the discipline because you need it during that 52-day period once it hits. And yes, if you utilize it, it helps to burn off the energy, such as creating a new pattern. And we're going to use the sleeping, going to bed and getting up. And for this example, that possibly about 3 weeks before, it would be ideal to start going to bed earlier, getting up earlier. So when that time, when that 52-day period hits, you're already in a pattern. Again, it takes 3 weeks to make or break a pattern. And then you're going to be more than likely more consistent with it instead of just starting it once that period hits. So that's the wiser thing is to prepare and that you're already in the flow of it once that 52-day period hits. But this is something that, you've danced with off and on for many years. And I really enjoy being an early to bed, early riser, especially over the last couple of weeks. There's been a big shift, and I even got up at 5:30 yesterday morning and just worked all morning. It was such a beautiful and special time. So I'm glad that you're visiting those early mornings and getting to bed earlier, and you're already seeing a difference in how you feel. Now, see, the opposite is if a person doesn't change those patterns, then there's going to be more than likely more self judgment and more tearing ourselves down, so to say, and that judgment weighs heavy. So, so see, somebody can read that and see that there's being suggested that they change something. They could even know what that is that needs to change, but then they got free will, so they may or may not change it. And then, of course, that card, the five of spades, just saying that it could bring on health problems or health issues if that change isn't initiated.
Yeah, they don't like tell you what the change is. And it's just funny how it all works out. Like and then another thing that I took another look at was what I was eating, and I kind of reflected back on when I felt the healthiest in my life, what was I eating then? And I went back to that. So I also, have been putting intentionally more energy into eating well and also resting well.
It makes a
But
big
it
difference.
was yeah, and it was that scare that I had where, in that Mercury period, it also said that you may need to leave your house or business suddenly, as well as, your health may take a quick positive or negative direction. So I had read that 3 weeks before I entered into my 52-day cycle with that energy, and my mind was like, what could it be? Could I have a house fire? Like, why would I need to leave my house quickly?
Mhm.
And I'd had these different scenarios, and one was also I went back to that train derailment in Ohio when they like burned off all this chemical, and everybody it just went all over the whole town. And like to me, that's one of my worst nightmares is you have no control over that, and your house is now affected, your land value, your health, everything, and the authorities don't you're a victim of what they decide to do. You lose control over your own, like, health and direction. So that was my biggest fear out of all that. And then after entering in that period, it was like a week later where just to quickly talk about it, there was a fire at a scrapyard, like, right down the road from me. And so I did some research, and somebody said there was chemicals involved, and I had photos of, like, flames in the air, and I looked up, what's in the scrapyard, and I didn't see, like, any, like, toxic I mean, there's lead and, of course, car parts and stuff like that, but that created, like, a question in me, like, I wasn't sure because the 52-day cycle said you may have to me, I was like, "Should I? Like, do I need to? Because it said I may need to?"
Mhm.
So I got caught up in that, in the, because the card said and it was almost correct, like, do I need to leave because it said it?
Right.
And had I not read the cards, I probably wouldn't have really given a lot of energy to it, been like, "Okay, something's on fire, I'll just close my windows, not a big deal." Maybe looked into a little further, but because the card said that, my mind immediately went there once I saw that there was a fire, and not I don't want to say I was in a panic mode, but I was in analysis paralysis. And I
Right.
contacted you, Alexander, because I knew you were a neutral party, and I knew that I wasn't seeing these clearly, and I just didn't know how to take the cards. And I know it said May, and I think that's important.
Mhm.
But I was just shocked at how, like, precise it was in a way,
Yeah.
because it said May, and I had the opportunity to leave. I could have grabbed my cats and went somewhere. I don't know where I would have gone. I mean, I did go away for the day, and then I got more information, and then I felt back into my body, and I realized that I was reading more into it because the card said so.
Yeah, just a
And
suggestion.
and yeah, and so, like, that whole scenario, I brought that whole scenario up because that is what led me to, like, okay, this was kind of a health scare and a location scare, but let me actually go into my health. Like let's be prepared here and look at the health, because this made me reflect back on, am I doing everything I need to be healthy? So let me, even though I was already in that period, let me proactively, look at my health and do what I need to do. So anyway, with all that said, I didn't know how to take that energy with it, calling it out that way, and because the card said so, and because it's been right so much in the 7 years that I've been dabbling in it, I've been able to, tell people stuff that they're going through recently. A friend of mine, I just happened to look at her chart and I was like, "Hey, it looks like you may be going through a love triangle," because she had 3 hearts in the Venus period, and she's
Yep.
like, "How did you know that?" It's like, "I need to know more information."
Uh,
But anyway, the funny thing is that that occurrence led me to move more into a positive health direction. And so again, my question was like, can we preemptively or proactively burn that energy off where it would be, where it would most likely not have to shift to the negative?
well, first of all, I want to reply here to say that anytime we're receiving divine message, whether that's through the destiny cards or having a medium do a reading for you or psychic or whatever it is, the tool, we should always be weary of when fear comes up. That divine messages normally don't involve fear. And A, we should see that we're carrying that fear, and that's how we are perceiving this. For example, when Sherry, my wife, died 16 years ago, it was in my cards that I would go through one of the most difficult divorces that anyone could go through. That was my card. But see, at that time, I wasn't accepting anything negative. I wasn't looking at things from the polarity viewpoint. And so I didn't allow that information in. So see, this is another situation to where, because it was so literal and it did say that you might need to leave, again, might, or you may need to leave. Then a scenario got created that was so similar that it did evoke fear. And I think what I suggested to you was that our actions should be in the direction to ease the mind and get back to trusting that everything's in divine order here. So I think my suggestion was to you is that, hey, if it's on your mind, it's weighing on your mind, then make a move. Actually go find somebody to stay with. And we don't have to get into, do I need to? See, that's where people get stuck, is this whole, am I going to do it right or wrong? And being the investigator energy is that, oh, it's just interesting that this came in. So this is going to be a little bit inconvenient, but I'm going to go ahead and make an adjustment for these 2 or 3 days so that I don't go into this fear place. So I think that this is a big deal about, of course, we suggest that if you're going to follow signs, that you need to be able to trust that you're able to be in neutral state, a neutral state of non-preference. Because if you're making the decision out of preference, then these emotions are going to show up. Because again, then we're afraid that we're going to do it right or so called wrong. And in reading signs or paying attention to intuition, it's not about right or wrong. It's about doing an action that you feel pulled or drawn to. And then you don't have any control. It's accepting that you don't have any control out of, after you take that next step, what reveals itself in that next step. So this is, again, learning to live life from a trust standpoint rather than a fear standpoint. And I think this was a great experience to, like you said, even catapult you to maybe be more serious about your health and your food and your resting. And so, see, we'll be thankful for that little bit of fear that come in for that. But that wasn't, all I want to say is that wasn't necessarily a necessary step. And I think in the future, because you went through this experience, you won't necessarily need that extra step. It's just that, okay, we get a little bit of information. Now let's be prepared to make an action. if I need to make an action, because this is all about easing the mind, because the mind is where the emotions and the judge sits, and that's where the emotions get involved. And then that can affect us on all the different levels. So, see, somebody being fearful of making a decision and they're in that fear, they're already weakening their body, weakening their immune system. So then, see, the environment may not have been as toxic as if they just hadn't have been in fear about the environment. So this is a great subject to touch on, and I hope that that explanation brings some clarity.
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts of like fate come in and like self-fulfilling stuff and like I look at it as the universe always knows how to get my attention. And I feel like it got my attention the way it needed to for me to take my health seriously.
Yeah.
And so maybe I was fated in this 5 of spades energy to get back on, a healthier trajectory, and that's the way it had to communicate to me in the way that it did, because like I had to read that 5 of spades message in Mercury to say that I had to leave, because again, if I didn't read that, then I would have just been like, oh, there's a fire, that's interesting, let me shut my windows.
Right.
But because I read that, it did bring in some fear and anxiety around making a decision, wanting to be right, don't know what's best for me and my animals and all of that. So it's just funny, like looking back on it, you can see how it had to communicate
To
me
get your
in that
attention.
way for me to take it seriously and take my
Yes.
health seriously.
And I think that that's the key to getting out of right and wrong and duality mentality, and staying in polarity mentality. That these opposites have to exist. So, see, we can still say this was in divine order, as another way of saying that it was fated, because that was the only thing that was going to ring your bell loud enough to affect this change. But it also means that moving forward, if you gain wisdom, you don't need to go through that step of fear again. It's just, okay, let me be prepared to make whatever adjustment that I need to make. And so again, it's not the strongest that will survive, it's not the smartest that will survive. It's the one that can adapt. And next time, I think you will be better prepared to adapt and not necessarily need to go through that catapulsion of the actual fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even brought up, more or less said, like, why didn't you prepare more? Like you read it, like I prepared mentally in a way, but I didn't like actually physically prepare for something. Like I didn't have like
Right.
a bug out bag, or I didn't have a plan in place. So that would have been
Yeah, and
that
this
would have
was
eased my mind
yes,
more.
this was similar, that if there's a hurricane or tornado coming or any type of weather, like people can waste so much energy trying to decide whether they should do something or not, whether that's do sandbags and put it around their property or leave. And see, the key is to get yourself out of friction. So if you need to leave or make some sandbags or dig a trench or whatever logically comes to you that you might need to do, go ahead and do that and prepare so that your mind is more at ease, so that you are more grounded, more present when the actual situation comes. You're prepared. So, getting out of this idea that we're going to make the wrong decision is part of this practice right here. And it's just that if you get an intuition or you get a sign, whether that's from the cards or whatever it is, then take action on that information. And then if you don't wind up needing to use it, so you don't see it as wasted time or energy, because this is where it's difficult to explain. Like, you know, many people have left their home and then had the thought of whether they turn the stove off or not. And they battle whether to turn around because is this going to be a waste of time? And I try to teach people that nothing's a waste of time if you act on your instincts. And even if you came back all the way home, say you were an hour away, you decided to come home and you check the stove and the stove is off. See, a lot of people are going to say, see, that was wasted time. It's going to be 2 hours of wasted time, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the way I choose to look at it. I choose to look at it that my intention to come back could have been enough for that stove not to be on. So it wasn't wasted time. That anything that we put our energy into it's helpful to stop looking at it as a so-called waste of time, because again, here we're going to bring in one of the other pillars, that every person and situation can be your teacher if you're willing to be the student. And see, the student never, I don't tend to use absolutes, but the student rarely wastes time because there's always something to learn. So I think that's another big key here, is yes, that when we follow those directions, whatever those nudges are, it eases the mind. And then if it doesn't wind up being what we thought it was going to be, see, we don't go into judgment of it. We just accept, oh, well, that's what needed to happen. Like you said, I needed to go through this to get this little shock. And that's what I need to go through with Sherry dying, is that nothing else would have in my life would have humbled me the way that that did. And it wouldn't have been losing anybody else in my life. So it had to be her. And it had to be that devastating for me to alter my life on every level. And I did. So there is no woulda, couldas, or shouldas. And every time that you go into those phrases or those words, you're not getting the lesson. And so anytime you want to use the words would have, could have, or should have, simply say, from this point on, this is what I've learned, and moving forward, this will be different. And I think that's exactly in your scenario of the fire down the road. I think you'll take this and you won't need to go through that fear step, and you'll just start going into action a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and even in your example of the person coming home to shut the stove off and the stove not being on, they're taking that step to put their wellness first, and they're alleviating that mind drain, which eventually could lead to, you know, a dis-ease on the physical plane, or a weakness that then they could, like, I mean, break something,
Oh,
or
yeah, even a
get an illness or an
distraction.
organ.
Yeah, even a distraction like driving. See, if somebody's thinking about, did they turn the stove off or not, they're more likely to have an accident. To where, yeah, so-called wasting 2 hours to go by back to make sure that that is off. Now my mind is at ease, and I'm not gonna look at those 2 hours as wasted, because I learned and I relieved some stress and I learned something. And so I think that that's a big key, is how people look at time, and that what is actual wasting time, and does that really exist if you're truly a student of life? I don't know that it does.
Yeah, and so the whole lesson, or a large part of the lesson for me, was just a reminder that this work really comes down to how the issue is making you feel internally, and how to alleviate that. Because that was my biggest lesson with the willpower versus trust argument, when I wanted to know which one I was supposed to be in, and finally I got it on like the third or fourth conversation we had, which is it's all about how it's making you feel,
Right.
into which one you go into at different points in time. So that was my big reminder there, for that situation.
Yes, yes, and I think it goes to even, that we're just our worst enemy in how we choose to look at things. It can be in sports, like somebody shooting a free throw, and they've shot millions of free throws, but when it's in a playoff game and there's very little time on the clock, see, the person shooting that free throw makes that harder on themselves instead of just going and shooting a free throw. And it's the same here. And instead of just going and turn around and going back and checking the stove, people will worry about that for days, and they won't be able to let it go, instead of just so-called inconveniencing themselves. Spending time to go ease the mind is very useful.
So when I was up in the Northeast, I had a chance to be active and spend some time with my nieces and nephews, and I mean, I had a great time. I'm making some progress on getting them to move down here. It's getting close.
Interesting.
Uh, but my nephew is 11 years old now, and he always wants to, like, throw a football. And I never had a little brother growing up, or I always wanted one, because I always wanted somebody who always wanted to play sports, because I always want to play sports. And so it was great for the both of us. We were always outside throwing a football. And when I was around my two brother-in-laws, we used to play football once a month when I lived up there, 10 plus years ago, with a bunch of other people. And so we kind of rekindled some of that, where we were just running some plays, and on like 2-on-2 football. And my oldest sister had just gotten 2 new dogs within the last year or
Mm.
so. So one is still a puppy, one's 1 year old. And they were on a tether, and I had picked up the football and I was throwing it to my nephew, and one of the dogs like jumped up and kind of like hit me like this with his paws, kind of like, so I was like, oh, this is kind of funny. It's like I'm getting blocked as I'm throwing the football.
Sure.
And then I got the ball again and I went to go throw it, and the dog like nipped at my left arm, but didn't draw any blood or anything, just kind of nipped at it. And I was like, okay, I need to get a little further away because clearly this dog, is having some issues, and it may try to bite me. I didn't think it would bite. I don't know that it has a history of biting at all, but it is young and energetic. So I tried to measure with my eyes how long the rope was, and I moved further away. And then I went up for another pass, and the dog like latched onto my arm and drew blood.
Mm.
And I was trying to play through it because I'm like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It just got me. Then I look down and I'm bleeding, and I got like the hit to go in and clean it. And luckily, my sister had some colloidal silver as well, so that's usually my go-to cleaner
Mhm.
for cuts and stuff. So I went in and cleaned it. I just said, hey, your dog bit me. I didn't like. I know I had a little bit of awareness come in where if my dad had that issue, he'd be like, victim mode. Oh,
Mhm.
dog bit me. It's the worst thing ever. So like I had that vision come in of like my dad's energy, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that because I know I can be over dramatic sometimes.
Good call.
And I just went in and cleaned it up and put colloidal silver in. So that appeased me because normally, like, I know my dad's response if he got bit, he would be like, I have to go to the hospital. Somebody else needs to tell me, I need to get a tetanus shot. And I just knew internally when it happened that I just needed to clean it and I'd be good. So that's what I did. And so it was all good. But I wanted to bring that up because I also got bit when I was younger on the inner left thigh by a dog, an older dog that I just happened to bump into, and it just like turned and out of reaction and bit me. And so that's not why I don't like dogs. I don't like dogs because of the uppity energy, and it's just I feel like you always have to be on with them. And so that's why I don't have a dog, because I don't want that energy kind of in my environment when I'm home. And I have worked on, I used to, like, really dislike dogs and be afraid of them all throughout my childhood, and partly because we never had a dog either, so that exposure,
Yeah.
I haven't had that either, but I I've really looked at, like, the past 5-ish years that I don't have any fears around dogs, like, I'm fine being around them. So I did go through the process, I rechecked in, was I in fear of any of that? And absolutely not, I wasn't in fear of the dogs. So, I wanted to get your wisdom on it tried to bite my left arm, missed, but then it got my right arm and then latched onto that. But at the same time, when I'm playing football, I started playing with my kind of like dress shoes on, and then I hurt my foot, shifting and moving, and so I put my sneakers on, and I ended up, like, having kind of like a bruise on my right foot, kind of right under my pinky toe.
Mhm.
So, all that happened within the same day, and I I wanted to ask you your opinion on all of it. I did look at, like, the foot thing. Am I having any questions about where I wanna take a step forward in life?
Mhm.
And, not sure how I felt like that. Again, like, this is all being the investigator, trying to look at where that might be, and then also the right arm, I wasn't 100% sure what you would say would be the way to look at that, with it being a dog and not just, like, cutting myself on something.
Right. Well, first of all, we want to start off with the most basic, that the left side of the body is the receiving side, the right side is the giving. Left side is female, right side is male. And so I would just suggest that normally around elbow area, just that's the general area you were kind of pointing to. Elbows is all about when we feel like ourselves or somebody isn't representing us properly. Like the view of holding something back is like what the elbows are connected to, or worried about the outcome. So see, I would just suggest right off the bat to pay attention to how you feel like you are receiving other people's views, um, direction, and how you feel like that's the left side. And then more importantly, how you feel that people are receiving what you are giving, which it could be advice, direction. This was shortly after the bowling incident that we talked about on
Yeah. Yeah.
the last podcast, previous one, and how your mediation went, and that you didn't necessarily, you got called out, and so like, was the way that you were helping being properly received? And so this could be some tied into your family, because I know that you were spending an isolated amount of time with family and your work up north, but it could also be residual from your friendship group and the bowling group as well. So I think your life is just, yeah, pay attention to how you're stepping forward in both how you are being received when you're giving direction, and also how you are receiving other people's direction. So I think that to me is what that message would come down to, is that it wasn't anything really serious, because it's just a light suggestion of, hey, just start paying attention to this, because the way you move forward, you may want to be received better. And it may, you also, in order to be received better, you may be needed to listen to other people's ways of approaching things. See, again, acceptance doesn't mean that we agree with or condone, but many times we can make sure that people know when we don't agree with something. And that can be, see, an inflexibility in receiving. Maybe it just needs to be that, hey, you bring up an interesting point, and normally I would shoot that point down right away. But I'm actually going to contemplate on that today. And I'm going to just kind of sit with that and see like how it feels to me. See, that is a left side of the body, like just in how you're receiving. It may or may not mean that the actual action is different, but that you are in acceptance of that somebody has a different way of looking at this. And rather than just me standing in the way that I look at it, I want to be a little more accepting and just, well, what if? Maybe I will consider this. That's kind of like practicing being the investigator again. And then when you're giving something, whether that's physical, emotional, energetic information or whatever, you want to make sure that you're not carrying a strong preference of how it's received. And if it's not being received well, the willingness to adjust the way that you're delivering it. So I think this is very connected to the bowling situation. And again, family brings these opportunities out more and more, because we're so set in the roles that we play in our family dynamics. And so I think there was a lot of information, but look very forward to hearing what, how you resonated with those few things, and maybe expanding on that.
Yeah, there was also, I mean, I had not had the talk with my dad yet, but I had heard from my sisters that they wanted me to kind of be a part of the communication with him because he is getting older, and my sisters kind of were thinking that my dad should maybe sell his home and move into something where he doesn't have to take care of a lot of things, because they felt like it was a burden on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, my dad still doesn't have a will made. And so I'm hearing, their concerns from both of them. And so on this happened all on Saturday. And on Monday, I went over to my dad's house and I had a conversation with him. And I told him that I'm taking over kind of like the logical part of when he passes, like dealing with all the stuff. Cause I feel like my sisters, they have more responsibilities and they've put up with my dad far more than I have since I've left. So it's only fair that I can shoulder some of that burden, which I feel like I'm more designed to do that anyway
Well
with the
said.
with the logical. So I felt like it was more in my strength. So I told him that. And then so hearing like my sister struggle with worrying about my dad and worrying about these things and not like talking to him, or maybe they have said these things to him but he doesn't take it as seriously when they do. I knew that I had to kind of come in with like a more of a commanding energy in a way, or more directional energy, or more like stern energy, being like, I'm taking over this part, and please do not do this to us where you don't have a will and we now have to deal with the state if something happens to you.
Mhm.
Like, don't do that to us. That's that's a pain. And so I was, I had to be serious with him and stern and put a boundary up and tell him like, you need to get this done. You need to make it a priority. We're gonna make it as easy on you as possible. Like my older sister reached out to people to get a reference for a lawyer for handling that, and just kind of help him move that energy toward that direction.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe some of this had to do with that as well, because I'm hearing this and I was kind of like
Yeah.
thinking about it and preparing to have these conversations with my dad.
Yes, very much the right side of, yeah, I don't know how I'm going to be received here. And so again, the more flexible we can be in how we deliver things takes that pressure off. See,
Yeah.
when somebody's afraid of how they're going to be received, they're not going in with multiple ways to approach it. Normally, they're going in with a very slim or singular way to approach it, and they're banking on being received in this specific way. To where conscious communication is all about being able to be flexible with the way you're going to say it, the words that you're going to use, the energy that you're bringing for the highest likelihood of receptivity. And even the most conscious communicator is willing to adapt in the moment, so to say. That if you say something that creates resistance, then right away say it in another way to shift to get out of that resistance. Because if you create resistance in somebody, very rarely do they come back around. So once the resistance is created, majority of the time it's the wisest to just plan on continuing that conversation at some other time. But for the conscious one that is willing to adapt even in midstream, that becomes the optimal communicator. And once again, we can only practice when we meet resistance. So I think this is another just little flashlight moment for you to realize that yes, all this was coming together. It was certainly about the right side, and that was the side that I feel like you said that you actually got bit on. And so, see, there was more of a concern in your psyche and in your energetic field of how you're going to be received a little bit more than maybe how you're receiving others. Because I think you've really worked on both of those aspects. But I would say that you've probably even worked on more being more receptive to people and the way that they are trying to communicate rather than just maybe shooting them down or correcting them right away, maybe as you did, 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. So just kind of doing a check in to just be realistic with yourself about, yeah, how flexible am I in both receiving what people are saying and how flexible am I in what I'm giving? Because again, you can have good intentions, but if you have poor communications, good intentions are the death of a wise one. And the communication is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And, yeah, and I do feel like I'm pretty good at, especially with my family, because I know them, and we're decently vulnerable with each other. That I do I did go to that conversation with my dad knowing that I can, or at least I have like a knowing that I can try to get to him at some point. If he
Mhm.
resists me here, I feel like I have different ways of saying things. So
Right.
I did feel good going into that. I didn't have any fear around it, but yeah, all that's good. So being around my dad, he told me this story about his car, and he said that his car has had 2 hood replacements. And I was like, "Dad, I've never had a hood replacement." And I've kinda heard these stories in the past, but I didn't realize it was, like, the same car. And after he told me, I was like, "Dad, that if that's not a spiritual, like, sign, I don't know what is."
It's rare.
But he
Yeah.
said that at one point a bird flew into his hood, or he hit a bird and it dented the hood, and so he had to get a new hood or whatever. And then this other instance happened in the same spot where he was in a parking lot. I don't remember the whole story, but he was in a parking lot. Some guy who was outside of his car got mad and hit his hood.
Oh wow.
I don't know what led up to that, but the fact that it hit in the same the same spot. I was like, "Dad, if that's not if that's not a sign, I don't know what is." But I didn't know what it could be a sign of because it's a car and not necessarily our body.
Mhm.
So I don't know what your thought. I mean, I guess does it come down to like what the car represents for him?
Yeah, I think that, that plays a role in it, and the purpose of the hood, which is to protect arguably the most important part of the car, which is the motor. So see, when we can use external things like a metaphor and say, okay, how does this car equate to the body? Then that could be like the protection. It could be like the chest or lungs to protect the heart. It could be the skull to protect the mind, because the heart and the mind are the two parts of the body that uh, emergencies are created, because it's the survival of those two determine, a person being alive or not. So in that situation, yes, taking care of and making sure that you're maintaining well the areas of the most precious parts of the body, since that's it's really the motor and the transmission are the kind of the two main parts of a car. And then we have our heart and our mind. So right away, that could be like, I'm not sure, but like if your father was overweight at all, then see, that could be putting a strain on the heart. So it could be like taking the message like that, like, hey, is there something that I need to do around the heart or the brain that I've kind of been getting a nudge to do, but I haven't actually implemented yet? That's kind of like the way that I would normally look at things, as a metaphor, and how does that equate externally. Now, like you asked, it could mean what the car represents to him. Is it just a way to get back and forth from A to B? Like, that's what a lot of people think the body is, as they don't take it that serious, because, hey, it's just here for me to make money, to pay my bills, to support my family, blah, blah, blah. When actually it can go much, much deeper than that, for some people. And that it's about the experience of it, and maintaining it as best as possible, and keeping it nice and clean, and that kind of thing. So I think all of that can weigh in to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's just ironic that he's I guess he's going through some issues. I know he's having his heart tested out, but I don't know if it's like specifically with the heart. They're trying to figure out why he has like low energy and, low stamina.
Right.
With just, with just doing normal things. And so all this happened, like a few years ago, and now he's at the point where he's having all this stuff checked out. So
Right.
it is kind of ironic that you brought that up, and then that's what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the beauty of, once again, it doesn't have to elicit any fear. It's just, okay, well, let me look at this, because this is happening, outside. You know, it's similar with homes. If you have a plumbing issue, then you might want to look at like how your removal process is in your body. If you have, a fire issue, then fire is connected to anger. So you might want to look at like why you're carrying a certain amount of anger, or why you're not working to get rid of that anger. So once again, every person and situation can be your teacher if you're willing to be the student. And this is just an example of using everything external as how to be a metaphor for this vessel that we're all experiencing. Our soul is using this as a vehicle, and the vehicle is temporary, but the soul is eternal. And some people are looking to make love with the friction in life, as we say, and to follow these signs, and that gets out of convenience and preferences and all that. Or some people just choose to follow their preferences, and if something isn't in alignment with their preference, and they just get upset, and normally that just brings more of that energy in. So it does come down to, there's not a right or wrong, and that's why I'm not saying, oh, this definitely means this. And approaching signs and how to read signs is a very complex subject. And I like to suggest to keep it as simple as possible. And the very first step is remaining the investigator, rather than the judge.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little like reading dreams too, kind of
Yes,
very
very
similar
similar.
process.
Yes, very similar.
Yeah.
And some people get a lot of information from dreams, and some people just think that dreams mean nothing. So once again, they can be very useful, but they can be misleading, like a reading or the destiny cards or anything else, if people bring negative emotions into them.
Yeah, I was talking to my homeopathic doctor, and she had a friend who had just discovered she had stage 4 liver cancer, which is, I'm pretty sure that's what it was, which is funny because I just had that experience with my former neighbor who had the same thing, and he died within a month, and I mentioned that experience to her, and that person died within a month too. And yeah, I think that person was like 35 years old, pretty
Wow.
young, and in pretty holistic overall in life. And so I mean, to be honest, like that brings in a lot of fear for me because I know like I went through the whole death thing around COVID and my fear of death, but like that is like that whole scenario is just, it's hard for me to grasp in my mind where you're fine one day and you're making plans, and the next day, maybe you have a pain and you don't get it checked out for a couple weeks, but it doesn't go away. So then you go to a doctor or you go to the hospital and you find out you have stage 4 cancer, and then it seems like from that point on you just disintegrate from knowing it mentally. And I don't know if the mental has a lot to do with that, the understanding. Because if you never went to the doctor, how long would you have, went on? Would it be longer? I
Yeah.
don't know. But anyway, just the whole thing, the whole like shift in perspective of yay life to oh wow, now I have nothing is hard for me to grasp.
I think it is for a lot of
So it's
people.
hard,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard for me to not have like, I don't know, fear comes in, but then I try to redirect that into, okay, what am I not doing right now that I'm afraid to not get done? And that usually comes down to being vulnerable with people, in my life. Um just that type of thing. Like if I was on my deathbed, that's, I would always go back to, I should have been more vulnerable with people.
Right.
I should have told them more, and I do that. I do that now, but I still feel like it's not enough,
Yeah.
Like I still don't push myself
And
enough.
these, I mean, these fears are real, but they are, self-generated. When we really break down fear and ask, what is there really truly to be fearful of? A lot of people are fearful of death, but it's like it's one of those givens that is a definite. And our culture didn't support that to be embraced. But see, death isn't anything to fear. Even, I was going through that with Sherry, and I've been through a lot of death, as listeners that's listened over many years have known. I've just been through a lot of death for somebody my age, and the main thing that's come from that is that, there's nothing negative about dying, because that's something that everybody has to do. And somebody says, well, it's such a shame that person had to die at 35 when they didn't live to 80 or 90. But if that soul fulfilled the contract that it came here to do, see, the dissolving of the body is nothing negative. And so this is again more type of mental ways of perceiving things and reminding every time that fear shows up to just say, hey, we've all got to die, and none of us know when that is. And so right now it's just a general reminder to make the most of today. And then right away think about, hey, is there anybody that I'm not sure that they know how I feel about them? Then I'm going to call them today. And and so see, all these negative emotions can be incentive to go into action. And when we go into action and we stay in action, then see, those people are the ones that aren't afraid of death or aren't going to visit for any long period of time any negative emotion, because it's seen as more of like every negative emotion is just a sign that I need to go into a different action. And if I go into a different action, then I'll have different results. So seeing it more as a nudge rather than a fear, and to actually use fear as that catapult, so to say, as we talked about, in our last podcast, with everything that you went through from the bowling situation and taking on that energy. And so I think that's extremely important, is to realize that every time a negative emotion comes up, what is the message that I need to implement a different action? That's the way to work with processing these so-called negative emotions.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, hearing you explain all that, I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that. Like, I know these things. And so it just gave me a little bit of time to reflect on, throughout these 8 years that I've been around you, I've heard you say things that I didn't understand. And then I eventually worked up to understanding them on the mental plane. But I still struggled with like knowing them now. And then 8 years in, I can now look back on things that I struggled with knowing, and now I know them, and now
No more
I
struggles.
just
Yeah,
know
no more
them.
struggle.
And so it's gone through, and now it's cemented in all 5 of my levels. It's just this one now I'm realizing now, like, this is just something that I don't know yet,
Yes.
and I haven't completely integrated into my being, and it's just something that I need to work on slowly, and over time, it will become a knowing, and I will be able to feel it feel it on that level rather than just think it
Yes.
or have to redirect
Because see,
myself.
thinking is connected to a belief. Knowing is not a
Yeah.
belief. And knowing comes from thinking plus experience and practice is what becomes a knowing. So that's why when we catch ourselves in these challenging situations, see, my suggestion is, hey, go create a similar situation as often as you can to work on making your adjustments and adapting, so that now I no longer have to have this fear because I'm prepared, and now it's a knowing, it's not a belief anymore. Every time we're challenged with something, it's a belief, not a knowing. Truth does not need defending, it only needs mentioning. But beliefs are defended. Beliefs cause people to kill people, cause countries to kill large amounts of people, not knowing is in belief. And so, making that connection that all our emotional reactions are basically connected to belief. And when we move on past the belief stage into knowing, it means that we've practiced it. We failed over 100 times, but now in this 100th time, now it's a knowing, and I won't fail moving forward. So it's a process, and I feel like we've done a great job in both these back to back podcasts of just basically talking about doing the work. It's not about reading books. It's not the end when you understand it mentally. You've got to go. We haven't mentioned the 5 levels, but the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, the energetic, and the physical. SMEEP is our acronym. To remember that you can understand something on the mental, but it hasn't processed through the emotional because maybe you haven't exercised it or practiced it in the physical enough. So great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And just to mention, like, I have a coworker who we were just talking about this. She asked me, how do you do inner child work? Or is there a book that you recommend? And I was just like, you just do it. I mean, it's so simple, but you have to do it. And or knowing what has helped me, which is doing the work, knowing that effort, that action is what gets it done. Now I can see all these other people who are just like in resistance of actually doing, and they're just trying to find another mental way of
Solving it. Yeah.
shortcutting everything.
Yeah.
And they're wasting all this time when they could just be putting it into action and getting better over time. It just takes time. It's what we say at the end of every episode in our outro.
Yes. And
Right. I don't know if you want to
yeah,
say it.
gradual changes over long periods of time equals lasting results. And the way that we do something like inner child work simply means that when we were a child, we were taught to be fearful of certain things or to judge ourselves. Insecurity we will use. But see, every time insecurity comes up, to do the work is that you do whatever you are insecure about. The child does not do what they're insecure about. They run from it. So see, inner child work is that you work against your preference because your preference was taught to you and trained to you. And if you do that practice over and over and over, insecurity stops directing you. It doesn't mean that it stops existing, because I happen to feel that you're going to carry these sensations throughout your life, but they don't get to make decisions and direct anymore. And so this is why, again, I say practice that 100 times without any expectations of it getting better. And we're habitual creatures. If we do something 100 times and we're adjusting each time we do it, we will get better at it.
And just to bring up when you mentioned the insecurity thing, the word comfort comes up for me. And if it's comfortable, and you've said this a lot, which is, you do what's not comfortable, that's where the growth is. And so I feel like our society is going to whatever makes anybody comfortable. That's where you're supposed to be, and anything else you shouldn't be doing. And it's the exact opposite for doing the work. You have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. It's like when I'm driving to a new place, I used to be, and I still get it a little bit, but I get anxious about where, what does this place look like? What's the parking situation like? But once I'm there once and I go back, I'm like,
It's all different.
there's no issue because I already know what to
Completely
expect.
different.
So it's kind of like you gotta take that step forward a little bit, dip your toe in, see how it is, and then just keep pushing it a little more,
Because that is
and you'll get
that
there.
is the practice of the inner child work of being childlike. Is the child approaches something with excitement rather than fear. But see, excitement and fear is a very similar energy. It's just a slight perception. And the difference in that is self judgment. See, when self judgment isn't there, it's exciting. When self judgment is there and other people are going to grade me on this and blah, 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 then it's fear. So, see, this is how close we are to genius level, is that a slight shift in your perception, not the experience, but your perception changes your whole experience. And we adjust those perceptions by practicing, yes, what is challenging over and over and over, and it changes our experience.
Yeah, the answers are really simple, and I just think that people feel that if the answers they get are simple, that they're
Yeah.
wrong. They're supposed to be what is the meaning of life? There's supposed to be like some elaborate thing, but everything's just more simpler, I think, than what we think it should
Yeah.
be in some
And see,
ways.
people defend their beliefs, which is their trainings. And many parents out there are doing the best that they know how. But that doesn't mean that they aren't scarring or damaging, their children by projecting their own fears onto the child, or family lineage and those types of things. So this is, what the podcast and the wise podcast and the just philosophy is all about, is breaking family lineage, breaking patterns, and becoming who you were divinely meant to be. And we use the tools of the human design and the cards to help people to understand that. And then the practice is an individual effort, and you get more out of what you put more into. So if you work on things that are uncomfortable, then you're going to get stronger. If you work with things that are comfortable, you're not going to get stronger. So it does come down to that. And yes, I agree. The answers are simple, but the actions are challenging. That's why most people, once they think they know something or understand it mentally, they think they've done the work. No, the work is just now getting ready to start. And now you need to do that 100 times before you are, in the world, there's a 10,000 hours, that anything you put 10,000 hours into, you'll be at a professional level. And that's why I just say 100 failings. If you fail at something 100 times, you're going to get better at it if your intention is to grow each time. But if your intention is to just get upset when you don't get your way, then that's going to be what grows. So, two packed sessions
Yeah.
here with lots of information. So I hope all our listeners are really resonating.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it. I feel like we're still not as casual as we could be, but we just need to do it 100
That's right. That's right.
And
We'll get more
then we'll
casual.
get more
Yeah.
casual. All right. I appreciate everybody checking us out, and yeah, leave us some feedback if you
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Much love, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this free version of the Wise podcast. To hear the complete conversation and go deeper into the application of the tools and techniques of the Just Philosophy, head on over to wisewisepodcast.com and become a premium member. You'll get to hear all of our complete conversations, including the complete episodes of our Inward Journey story series and our entire back catalog, and continue your self-development journey with us. We honor your dedication to self-growth, overall wellness, and continuing to ask the wise.
And remember, gradual changes over long periods of time equals lasting results.
Continue on your self-growth journey by visiting thejustphilosophy.com, where you are able to connect personally by booking a private consultation with Alexander in person, by phone, or Zoom. Uncover your authentic self more easily with a human design or destiny card consultation. Here you will gain information about your energetic makeup, personality, and your higher self, as well as navigating your way through your relationships. There are also multiple types of reports available for purchase that help you gain insight into your career, relationships, and opportunities for self-growth. The site also allows you to view a calendar of Alexander's live performances and class schedule, peruse other products such as shirts, CDs, and finally, the revolutionary VibroTune vibrational sound therapy tables. These contoured therapy tables allow you to bathe in a vibrational sonic bath of frequencies, bringing you into alignment on all levels. You will be feeling and hearing calming music synced through vibration and frequency. So again, you can grab all this goodness at thejustphilosophy.com, thejustphilosophy.com. The Just Philosophy, as discussed in this podcast, has been developed by Alexander over the last 25 years in his personal studies, private practice, and professional environment. The information discussed is intended for educational purposes only and is not meant as a replacement for conventional medicine. Just remember, knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. Seek the wise. We want to thank you for working on you. Keep shining your light and refining your vibe.